White heavy checkmark disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction created solely for emotional and entertainment purposes. Any similarities to real people, living or dead, or actual events are purely coincidental. The story contains sensitive themes involving family, loss, and personal revelations. Reader discretion is advised. It was a Tuesday morning like any other, gray skies, half-burnt toast in hand, and the usual quiet hum of the office, where people typed more than they spoke. I had barely sat down at my desk when my phone lit up with a message. It wasn't from a friend or a client, but from Mr. Callahan, my boss. The man who rarely smiled, spoke only when necessary, and seemed more like a shadow in the office than a person. The message was brief. Would you like to join me for coffee after work today? Just to talk. At first, I stared at the screen, unsure if I had read it correctly. Was this a joke? A test? Mr. Callahan had never shown interest in anything beyond work-related matters. The closest we had come to a personal conversation was when he once asked if I was okay after I returned late from a funeral. Even then, his voice had been flat, his eyes unreadable. Still, curiosity tugged at me. Something in the way the message was worded, polite but hesitant, made it feel different. Almost vulnerable. I replied with a simple sure. But my mind spiraled the entire day, wondering why he'd reached out to me of all people. By 6 p.m., we were seated at a quiet, corner cafe near the park. It was far from the usual bustling places around our office, as if he'd chosen it carefully to avoid being seen. He looked awkward, slightly out of place in his crisp suit among the more relaxed crowd. I ordered a cappuccino. He ordered tea, no sugar. The conversation started off slow. He asked how work had been going. Mentioned a few things about the company's upcoming restructuring. But none of it felt like the real reason we were there. He kept glancing at his watch, then at the window, then back at me. His hands fidgeted with the napkin on the table, folding and unfolding it repeatedly. It wasn't until the third awkward silence that he said something that made my stomach drop. There's something I've been meaning to tell you for a long time. I just never found the right moment. My fingers tightened around my cup. About what? He looked directly into my eyes, his own filled with something I couldn't quite place, regret, maybe, or guilt. About someone we both knew, your mother. My heart skipped a beat. My mother had passed away nearly a decade ago. She was my entire world, taken too soon in a car accident when I was in college. I had never heard Mr. Callahan mention her before. I didn't even know they'd ever met. I sat there frozen, trying to understand what was happening. Why was my boss, a man I barely knew outside of work, suddenly bringing up the most painful part of my past? He sighed, as though preparing himself. Please, just hear me out. There's a lot I need to explain. And just like that, my world tilted on its axis. The cafe around us buzzed with quiet life, baristas calling names, espresso machines hissing, couples talking in low tones, but I could hardly hear any of it. My mind was stuck on his words. There's something I need to explain, about your mother. The cup of cappuccino in front of me had long gone cold. I hadn't taken a sip since he said her name. Mr. Callahan seemed just as tense. He looked older in the warm light of the cafe, less like the untouchable figure I'd known at the office and more like a man who'd carried something heavy for far too long. His fingers played with the edge of the saucer as he tried to find the right words. I've started this conversation in my head 100 times, he said softly, avoiding my eyes. But now that we're here, I realize I still don't know how to begin. I cleared my throat, not sure what to say. You knew my mother? He nodded. Yes, very well. Before you were born. My eyebrows furrowed. How? He looked down at his tea, swirling the liquid as if the answer might be hidden at the bottom. We met in college. Same literature class. She was bright, outspoken, full of ideas. Everyone noticed her when she entered the room. I noticed her most. His voice cracked slightly at that last sentence, and for the first time, I saw not my boss, but a man reliving something deeply personal. We were close, he continued, very close for a time. But life took us in different directions. She met your father. I moved to another state. I sat frozen, processing his words. Why are you telling me this now? He finally met my gaze. Because I've carried something inside me for far too long. Guilt, regret, and responsibility. You deserve to know. The air between us felt thick with the weight of everything unspoken. I didn't know whether to feel angry, confused, or something else entirely. Why had he kept this from me for so long? What did he really want to say? I used to write letters to her, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Even after we drifted apart. I never stopped caring. After her accident. I found out far too late. I never got to say goodbye. I could see his hands trembling slightly now. There was no denying the emotion in his voice, the sincerity in his eyes. For a man who had always kept his emotions locked away behind spreadsheets and brief meetings, this vulnerability was almost painful to watch. I know I should have come forward sooner, he added. But I didn't want to seem intrusive. Or inappropriate. You were grieving. And I was afraid. I sat back, my heart pounding. I didn't know what this all meant yet, but one thing was clear. This wasn't a simple coffee meeting. This was the beginning of something that could change everything I thought I knew about my past and about the man sitting across from me. The air inside the cafe felt heavier than before, like it was holding its breath along with me. Mr. Callahan sat still, his hands now resting on the table, eyes cast downward. I could tell he was choosing his next words carefully, but I was already teetering between disbelief and anticipation. I didn't just know your mother, he finally said, voice low and reverent. I loved her. The word loved lingered in the space between us like a forgotten name whispered in a dream. I blinked, my mouth slightly open, unable to speak. My mind tried to grasp the new shape my memories had taken. My mother, my brave, kind, fiercely independent mother, had shared a love story I never even knew existed. You were so young when she passed, he continued gently. And I didn't want to complicate your grieving process, especially as someone who had no official place in your life. But I was there, quietly, watching from a distance. You mean at the funeral? I asked, unsure why the thought suddenly struck me. He gave a sad nod. I stood at the back of the church. I didn't want to intrude, but I had to say goodbye. A sudden memory bubbled up, one I hadn't thought of in years. A man at the funeral, dressed in black, standing silently beneath the old oak tree outside the chapel. He hadn't spoken to anyone. I had assumed he was a distant relative or perhaps a colleague of my mother's. That was him. Why didn't you ever tell me this before? I asked, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. He took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. Because I didn't know how. I wasn't part of your story anymore, not officially. But then, you applied to our company. I saw your name on the resume and I froze. I didn't think it was possible. But it was you. My eyes widened. You mean, you hired me not because of pity or sentiment, he cut in quickly. You earned your place. You're smart, driven, everything your mother was. But yes, knowing who you were made me feel responsible. Like I owed her something. Like maybe, in some small way, I could still keep that promise I once made. What promise? I whispered. He looked at me with eyes full of a kind of sorrow I didn't know how to carry. That if anything ever happened to her, I would watch over you. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. For so long, I had felt like I was navigating the world alone. But now it seemed that someone had been silently keeping a watchful eye, all along. He reached into his coat and slowly pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with age, slightly creased. She left this. For you. She gave it to me years ago and told me, give it to my child when the time is right. I thought I'd know when that moment came. And today, I just felt it. He slid the envelope across the table. My hands trembled as I picked it up, holding it like a piece of her soul had just found its way back to me. I stared at the envelope resting in my hands, as if it might vanish the moment I blinked. It was aged, delicate, and carried my name on the front in my mother's handwriting, something I hadn't seen in nearly 10 years. My breath caught in my throat. It felt like the past had come alive in the form of this fragile piece of paper. I've kept it with me ever since she gave it to me, Mr. Callahan said, his voice soft. I didn't know when would be the right time, or if I even had the right to give it to you. But I always hoped that someday I could keep my promise to her. With trembling fingers, I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The moment my eyes landed on the words, I felt my chest tighten. It was unmistakably her, my mother's tone, her gentle way of expressing herself, the way she poured so much emotion into so few lines. It began with love, but soon unraveled a truth I never could have imagined. She wrote of her youth, of how she met Mr. Callahan, his name was Thomas, she said in the letter. How they spent 2 beautiful years together during college. How they shared dreams, late-night poems, and secrets under the stars. She described their love as intense and real, but also timed wrong. Her family needed her. His career was calling him elsewhere. And when she found out she was pregnant, everything changed. My heart stopped. She didn't write the name of the father. Only that it had been complicated. That she made the choice to raise me on her own. She mentioned Thomas, Mr. Callahan, again, saying she never told him everything. She didn't want to hold him back, she said. But in the deepest part of her soul, she always believed he deserved to know one day. And if anything ever happened to her, he would be the one to protect me, not as a stranger, but as someone who had once loved her deeply. My eyes flicked up from the letter to meet Mr. Callahan's. Did you know? I asked quietly, my voice trembling. Did you know I might be? He shook his head slowly, eyes misting. No, I didn't. She never told me. I found out about the pregnancy only after her death, when I received that letter. I wasn't sure what to believe. But the moment I saw you walk into the interview room years later, I knew there was something familiar. Something I couldn't ignore. Everything inside me felt like it was collapsing and expanding at the same time. My life had been built on certain beliefs about who I was, where I came from, and what had shaped me. But now those foundations were shifting. Had I been working for my father this whole time? Had he been silently watching over me, carrying the weight of that unanswered question for years? I didn't know whether to cry or scream or run out of the cafe. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. The world outside the cafe continued moving. Cars passed by, people laughed at nearby tables, someone spilled coffee and muttered under their breath, but inside, time had stopped for me. I sat frozen, the letter trembling in my hands, its words echoing through my entire being. Mr. Callahan Thomas looked just as shaken. For a man known for calm control and stiff professionalism, his eyes now revealed years of sorrow, of quiet longing, and something that looked a lot like guilt. I've lived with this burden for a long time, he said, finally breaking the silence. Not knowing the full truth, and not knowing if I had any right to find out. I didn't want to cause pain or confusion. But I also didn't want to abandon the responsibility your mother left me with. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind inside me. You should have said something earlier. He nodded, ashamed. I know. Every time you walked past my office, every time we had a conversation about your work, I wanted to. But what would I say? Hi, I might be your father? That's not something you just drop into a conversation. And part of me feared rejection. What if I told you and you hated me for staying silent for so long? His voice cracked. Or worse, what if I found out I wasn't your father at all, and the hope I'd been holding onto all these years was just misplaced? I looked at him closely, seeing not the stoic boss I had known, but a man who had lived between the lines of a story he couldn't finish. A man torn between honoring a promise and fearing the consequences of truth. So you just watched me grow from a distance? I asked, still trying to comprehend it all. Yes, he said. I saw how strong you were, how determined, how much of your mother lived in you. I was proud, even when I couldn't say it out loud. When you got promoted, when you led your first project. I celebrated those moments in silence. The words hit me hard. I remembered every time I had hoped for his approval, every time his quiet nod or rare, good work, felt like 1,000 praises. And now I knew why. It wasn't just a boss appreciating an employee. It was something deeper. It was love, hidden beneath professionalism and fear. I'm not asking for anything, he added gently. Not your forgiveness. Not your acceptance. I just needed to tell you the truth. For her, and for myself. You deserve to know. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall, not yet. This truth, no matter how shocking or delayed, was a part of me now. It answered questions I didn't even know I had. It reopened wounds I thought had healed. And yet, it also gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time, the sense that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been as alone as I thought. I stared at the letter again, now crumpled slightly from how tightly I'd been holding it. The ink had faded in places, but my mother's words were still clear, gentle, thoughtful, and full of the warmth I remembered from childhood. Reading it felt like hearing her voice again, whispering from across time. I unfolded the second page, which I hadn't seen before. It was shorter than the first, more personal. It began simply, "To my child, if you are reading this, then I'm no longer with you in this world. And I'm sorry for that." The words struck deep. My throat tightened, and I blinked rapidly to fight back the tears threatening to fall. "You were my greatest joy, my brightest light. I raised you the best way I knew how, but I also carried things I never told you, parts of my past I kept buried because I wanted to protect you." Thomas was part of that past. He was kind, patient, full of dreams. He wasn't perfect, but he loved deeply. And at one time, he loved me. I could barely breathe as I read on. "I never told him about you, not because I wanted to shut him out, but because I was scared. Life had already pulled us apart, and I didn't know how to bridge that distance. But if you're reading this, I hope that he's found the courage I never did. I hope you see in him what I once saw, the goodness, the strength, the quiet loyalty." My hands trembled, and I placed the letter down, afraid I might tear it. Mr. Callahan, Thomas, sat quietly, watching me with a mix of apprehension and hope. He hadn't read the letter. He didn't need to. He had lived the pain it carried for years. "I used to write her letters, too," he said softly, breaking the silence. "I never knew if she read them all, but it helped me stay connected to something I had lost. When she gave me this one for you, I kept it close. Every time I moved, every time I traveled, I made sure I had it with me. It was the last part of her I had." The emotion in his voice was real. Raw. I finally understood the burden he had been carrying, not just of love lost, but of a responsibility left unspoken for years. He hadn't just been my boss all this time. He had been quietly protecting a promise, one that came wrapped in grief and silence. The letter was more than just ink on paper. It was a bridge between the past and the present, a gift from my mother to both of us. A moment frozen in time that had finally reached its destination. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my chest. I still didn't know where things would go from here. There were too many emotions to process, too many questions that had no easy answers. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had been given something back, a missing piece of my heart I didn't know was gone. Silence lingered between us after I set the letter down, but it wasn't heavy like before. It was different now, softer, warmer. Like the air had shifted. Like something long buried had finally surfaced and was now resting in the open, no longer needing to hide. Thomas, no longer just Mr. Callahan in my mind, looked at me with unsure eyes. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't reach for my hand or try to explain further. He just sat quietly, letting me sit with it all. And somehow, that gave me the space I needed. "I don't know what to feel," I said finally, my voice breaking slightly. "It's like, all these years I thought I had no one left, and now you're telling me you were there the whole time." "I was," he said softly. "Just not in the way I should have been." I nodded slowly, the emotions churning inside me like a slow storm. Anger tried to rise, but it never quite reached the surface. Sadness lingered too, but it was wrapped in something gentler now. Maybe acceptance. Maybe forgiveness. "I always wondered why you were so patient with me," I said, almost smiling. "Even when I made mistakes at work or took time off when things got tough, you never questioned it." He smiled faintly. "I wasn't trying to be your father then. I didn't think I had the right. But I did want to honor her. And I saw so much of her in you, your strength, your stubbornness, your heart." His words touched something deep inside me. For so long, I had tried to be strong. For my mother. For myself. I never wanted anyone to see how broken I sometimes felt after losing her. And now here was this man, this stranger who wasn't a stranger, who had seen me all along. "I'm still trying to understand what this means," I admitted. "I mean, if you really are my father, what happens next? A DNA test? A formal talk? Do we try to build something, or just let it go?" Thomas looked down at his hands, then back at me. I'll follow your lead. I've lived with the weight of not knowing for years. Just being able to tell you the truth is enough for me. If you want more, answers, time, a relationship, I'll be here. But I won't ask it of you. Tears filled my eyes again. This time, I didn't try to stop them. The wound in my chest, the one I'd carried for so long after losing my mother, felt just a little smaller now. Not gone, but healing. For the first time, I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. It was awkward, uncertain, but it was a beginning. I think I said quietly, I want to try. And just like that, something unspoken passed between us. A new understanding. A flicker of hope. The sun had dipped low outside the cafe, casting long shadows across the pavement as the street lamps flickered to life. Inside, the light above our table glowed gently, like it too understood the weight of what had just happened. My hand was still resting over his. For the first time in years, I felt something steady beneath the chaos, an anchor in the storm. Neither of us spoke for a while. We didn't need to. Words had carried us this far, but now silence did the rest. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was peaceful. Mutual. The kind of silence that forms between two people who finally see each other clearly. Thomas finally gave a small smile, one I had never seen at the office. It wasn't the polite, professional expression he wore during meetings. It was real. Worn, a little tired, but genuine. I was terrified you'd hate me, he admitted, voice low. Or worse, that you wouldn't care. I shook my head slowly. I could never hate someone who tried to protect me, even if it was from a distance. I just wish I'd known sooner. So do I, he said. But we can't change the past. We can only decide what we do with the future. It was a simple line, but it stayed with me. For so long, I had lived in the past, clinging to memories of my mother, aching for something to fill the emptiness she left behind. Now, I was being offered something I never expected, a second chance. A new chapter one hadn't even known I was missing. I'm not ready to call you Dad, I said honestly, my voice careful but not cold. Thomas nodded, completely understanding. You don't have to. We'll go at your pace. But, I continued, maybe we could start small. Like, coffee once a week? No pressure. Just see where it leads. His smile widened, and he looked away for a second, like he needed the moment to collect himself. I'd like that very much. We left the cafe together, walking slowly through the quiet streets. There was no dramatic music playing, no tearful hugs or sweeping embraces. Just two people, one discovering a hidden part of their history, the other finally letting go of years of silence. As we parted ways at the corner, he turned to me and said, "She would have been so proud of you. You know that, right?" I nodded, biting back the emotion rising in my throat. I hope so. And then he walked away, disappearing into the evening, not as my boss, but as someone who had waited years to be seen. I stood there for a moment, holding the letter tightly in my coat pocket. My mother's words. His truth. My healing. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I had something I hadn't felt in years, hope. Hope that the story of my life wasn't over. That maybe the most important chapter was just beginning. 55.